Okay, so our next speaker will be Robert Tierney. I hope that I pronounced that right. Robert Tierney, who is a lecturer at the University of Houston, and he is in his work he deals with moral psychology, philosophy of agency, and philosophy of law, and he will be giving us a talk about the venerated objects, neither idols nor mere symbols. And I also see here that you have a handout, so I will give that away to our people here in the audience, and I will just give you the scene now, as we do not have a recording of your... Sure.
The primary aim of this talk is to provide a naturalistic account of the reverence with which certain religious items are treated. This account centers on showing that these items are more than symbols. It's not a debunking explanation in that it is not incompatible with theistic commitments. Such being the case, it might provide some basis for mutual understanding across religious divides. Okay, so I have to introduce some definitions. None of these are anything new. They're there in value theory, and also one assumption, same thing goes. It's not some invention of mine. All right, so the first two set of contrasting terms are intrinsic value and extrinsic value. So intrinsic value is the value that something has solely by virtue of its internal properties. Extrinsic value is the value that something has solely by virtue of its external relational properties. The next pair of terms, also contrasting terms, final value versus non-final value. So final value is the value that something has in as much as it is valuable for its own sake, i.e. it's valuable as an end, and non-final value is the value something has for the sake of something else. The prime example being instrumental value. Perhaps there are other such kinds of value. Okay, I'm going to make this assumption that the basis of the value of any given extrinsically finally valuable particular is solely its properties, but it is the particular itself that is valued. It is the object of valuing. And since I wanted to preserve that word object as a sort of object of valuing, I've used this sort of clumsy word of particular instead of just talking about objects in the rest of my vocabulary here. Anyway, what I want to establish, first talking about these loosely and then ultimately defend this characterization of them, this idea of personally significant particulars as a type of extrinsically finally valuable particular that has value by virtue of which it serves to relate one person to another, the other person I'll call the relevant other, with whom one has a loving relationship. So I'll just call that the relevant relationship. So a couple of examples just to give a sense of this, because I'm not going to define it more precisely than that, but just sort of rely for a general sense of the idea on these examples. So from time to time, Carlos plays catch with his father. They played this game when Carlos was a young boy and continue doing so in his adulthood. They always play with the same baseball. Sorry, very American baseball. When they finish a game of catch, the baseball is placed back in its special spot in the closet. This baseball is never used for anything else. Over the years, they continue this activity as a way of staying connected, even in times of unhappiness, tension, or anger in their relationship. When they play catch, distractions and disagreements are put aside, if only for a short while. It provides a way of reconnecting, being both an assurance of the bond between them and a means of maintaining, repairing, and strengthening it. One more example, much shorter. This is Anna's watch. Anna's father bequeaths a watch to her. He had worn it since he was a young man, and it was of special significance to him. This watch says something about Anna's father. It is connected with how he was, how he presented himself to the world. It also spurs memories, Anna's memories of her father. So some questions then to address on the basis of this setup. So We often treat personally significant particulars, things of the sort that I just described in those examples, with a certain amount of care and respect, and this seems appropriate. It has something to do with how the particular relates to the relevant other. But how are we to understand that behavior and the regard in which we hold that particular? How are we to understand that value that the particular has? Well, I'm going to try to proceed to reach my conclusion by a kind of process of elimination. So the first question is, does the personally significant particular have intrinsic value? And a lot of times the kind of examples I gave are simpler examples of that kind that don't go into sort of these thick, always go into these sort of thick relationships or descriptions of relationships, are just kind of plopped out there as examples of things that are extrinsically valuable. But let me make the case that the value here isn't that in relation to which we exhibit this kind of behavior is not intrinsic value. Okay, so suppose Carlos, the guy with the baseball that he had played catch with his father and bonded in that way. So suppose Carlos was offered a financial inducement, say 100 euros, to exchange his baseball for a microphysical duplicate. After the choice, he'd have the amnesia, let's say. This can be set up. So he will never be able to tell the difference that there's been a substitution. He won't have any regret. His sort of psychological considerations won't play any effect here. So this offer is made to him. Thus, subsequently, he would not be aware that the original baseball had been replaced by a duplicate. I submit that Carlos would appropriately reject this offer. In this sense, the baseball is irreplaceable. So that's kind of the guiding idea of how I'm going to use that word, irreplaceable, not even replaceable by a microphysical duplicate. Given that the duplicate baseball would have the same internal properties as the original, these properties do not explain the value that the baseball has for Carlos. Thus, the baseball must be primarily extrinsically valuable. So not much of a surprise there. And I'm just going to keep working with the baseball example for simplicity. So next question, is the baseball instrumentally valuable? A form of non-final value. For example, it's useful for playing catch or for aiding Carlos's fond recollections of his father. Well, I say not, for this reason, or these reasons. Given that the duplicate baseball would have precisely the same instrumental value as the original, instrumental value, the idea of instrumental value, does not explain the value that the baseball has for Carlos. Moreover, the care and respect shown in terms of which the baseball is handled and stored go beyond preserving its instrumentally valuable qualities. Thus, the baseball is not primarily instrumentally valuable, at least not in terms of explaining the kinds of behaviors and the kind of regard in which it is held that we're talking about. Okay, third possibility. Is the baseball valuable as a communicative vehicle for either symbolizing or evidencing care and respect for the relevant other? Whether this is a kind of extrinsic non-final value different from instrumental value, I leave open. Don't really need to decide that. But in any event, I think not. It's not a vehicle for communication, or at least that's not what gives it the kind of value that we're talking about. So, for example, Carlos's father may be deceased and Carlos may not believe in an afterlife, but Carlos might appropriately think that this does not provide any reason for lowering the care and regard with which he treats the baseball. Nor need the baseball be used as a means to communicate to third parties, in that Carlos's treatment of and regard for the baseball may be kept private. Nor is the baseball primarily of value in that it is used for a kind of self-communication, for then it would not be irreplaceable. Thus, the baseball is not primarily valuable as a communicative vehicle through which one symbolizes or evidences care and respect for the relevant other. One more possibility, and I could try to characterize this in a pretty general way to catch different ideas, which I find a bit hard to get hold of. So here is the possibility or the question: is the baseball a symbol warranting care and respect, even if this treatment does not arise from one's use of it as a communicative vehicle? So it's a symbol in some other way, has value as that in some other way. That's the possibility here, other than as using it to communicate something or evidence something to someone. Okay, so maybe this is a form of non-instrumental extrinsic value that maybe it's final or non-final. I don't know. I don't need to take a stand on that. So example, to get the idea across, take a picture of one's mother. And I think we could acknowledge that that is, a symbol, a representation, and a kind of a symbol of one's mother. And imagine that picture being defaced or defiled. We'd find that sort of very upsetting. So this example makes it look like maybe something that is just a symbol could elicit this kind of care or protection that is at least something like what we've been talking about in terms of personally significant particulars. But I think it's not the same. Why? The defacing or defiling of the picture does seem to be a communicative act. That is, it's a communicative act by the defacer or defiler. And so if this explains our reaction, then the prior objections apply. Further, we would not lament the loss of the picture if it were replaced by a duplicate, even a real-world duplicate printed out by a computer, and even if we had full knowledge that it was just a duplicate. By contrast, Carlos would rightly reject, as we've seen, the replacement of the baseball. Moreover, Carlos would be particularly distressed if the original baseball were destroyed in a way one wouldn't be about the copy of a replaceable picture. Thus, the baseball is not primarily valuable as a kind of a symbol. So we have to try to make some sense of this, having eliminated at least the options that I can think of, and perhaps there are others, but so far where we've gotten kind of a process of elimination is that personally significant particulars are extrinsically valuable, and absent any further candidates as to some other form of extrinsic non-final value that they could have, they are finally valuable. In fact, the care and regard with which we treat a personally significant particular is appropriate to a particular with final value. Okay, so some implications of this. So the foregoing considerations show that enacting care and respect for a personally significant particular is bound up with care and respect for the relevant other. I take it that that's just fairly clear. At the same time, care and respect for the personally significant particular does not primarily serve to evidence or symbolize care and respect for the relevant other. This might appear a contradiction, or how do we put these two things together? So I think there's one option for harmonizing these conclusions. That is, in caring for and respecting the personally significant particular in accord with the final value that it has, one is, in those same attitudes and actions, literally enacting care and respect for the relevant other and the relevant relationship. This seems to be what is occurring in the core cases when we speak of cherishing a physical object. So I'll take that word cherishing as the word to use for this behavior, dispositions, regard that we have, attitudes in that cluster. Okay, so then the move is fairly straightforward to well, in a very general way. I have a lot more work to do to separate out the different kinds of cases and think them through more. But what I suggest is I propose we understand certain religious items as valuable in the same way as personally significant particulars. In the cases with which I'm concerned, a supernatural being is, at least relative to the believer's conceptions and intentions, playing the role of the relevant other. In the Roman Catholic tradition, this may be a saint or God himself, perhaps in the person of Jesus Christ. Thus, just a little 2x2 matrix in case that is useful in some way, where, we've got the difference between the mundane and the sacred in terms of the attitude toward the relevant person, and the term we might use to characterize the relevant attitudes and dispositions toward the object with which we're concerned. Okay. In such case, the venerated object is finally valuable and treated as such, and in enacting appropriate care and respect for it, we are enacting a form of care and respect for God. This is consistent with the following teaching from the Roman Catholic Catechism and the documents that back it up here. But I think this is a particularly interesting sentence. The honor rendered to an image passes to its prototype, and whoever venerates the image venerates the person portrayed in it. So the idea in that sentence, it seems to me, is that you are genuinely venerating the image. You're not, simply using it as a device. You're not faking or doing some kind of as-if actions of respect toward it in order to, create a sort of a communicative show, but you're venerating the actual image. But whoever venerates the image also venerates the person portrayed in it. So just reading this on its own, it seems to me we might be kind of quite puzzled as to how exactly that works. And treating the image as sort of just a symbol, it seems to me sort of won't do the job from the way I've said. But at the same time, the value that thing has that makes it worthy of veneration is because of its connection with another being. And so I thought having this, being able to work out an explanation in a secular case, we can sort of be more, have some, for those of us sort of outside this tradition, have some, kind of insight into it. It seems a little less mysterious, though, of course, it's premised on the idea that God exists, but I think that's a little easier to get hold of. Okay, so I suggest that some images and other objects, if they play an enduring role in one's relationship to God through prayer, may come to play this role, even if they're not officially deemed to be objects to be venerated. For example, a rosary or a crucifix, if that's important in one's prayer life and certain kinds of religious experiences over a period of time, that could come to have this, that object could come to have that special significance. Other such images and objects may achieve the status of being appropriately venerated through a blessing or consecration, dedicating them to such a role in the relationship between the believer and God. Yet other such images and objects may be taken to be marked out for such a role by God himself by means of a miracle. Okay, so with this analysis, the kind of care and regard that believers enact toward such religious items can be understood even from a secular standpoint on the assumption that God, that God is taken by the believer to be the relevant other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, for your presentation.